Hello everyone and welcome. I'm James Milan and this is Talk of the Town. This morning we are sitting down with our State Senator Cindy Friedman for an update from the State House and just in general to check in with on a number of issues of concern to Arlington and frankly to a much broader segment of this area and of the state's population as well. So first of all, Cindy, as always, we know how busy you are. Thanks for taking the time to sit with us.
Always happy to sit down with you, James.
Appreciate that. So let's talk. We have so many issues that we can talk about today, but just very briefly, and understanding the governor's budget just came out recently.
Yes.
And I understand that that's a long process in which the House and then the Senate in months from now are going to be, tackling that head on. But I wondered if you'd had a chance to look at it at all and what your first impressions are of the priorities that are evident in the budget, et cetera.
So I have looked very briefly at the budget, and we have not really done a lot of work doing a deep dive, although my staff has started to look at it. In general, I was happy to see that I think he's increased the earned income tax credit, which is a really a good thing for working families. I know that there's been some money put into mental health, which I'm very happy to see, but I don't know what it means yet. I haven't looked at it in detail to see what money's been put in and what money's possibly been taken out. So I'm withholding judgment, but my first, at first perusal, I'm happy to see that. And then the other piece that I've looked at is local aid and Chapter 70 money. I think the local aid is what it is. Everybody got 3.5%. I'm more concerned about the Chapter 70 money, and I don't see movement toward funding the foundation budget, the education foundation budget, which based on the commission and where we need to go to fully fund education, I don't see a lot of movement there. So that concerns me, but we'll be looking at it in much more detail over the next 3 months.
And just for clarification purposes for the audience, Chapter 70 money is?
Chapter 70 money it refers to the Mass General Law in which we lay out the statutes and laws for funding education. And so that's the money that the state puts in, its share of education funding for the Commonwealth cities and towns.
Okay, and because you mentioned it, and because we have so many choices of subjects to move through, local aid. Obviously, this is always a concern for especially towns like Arlington. And I know that you represent a district that includes 4 other towns as well, none of which are in the precise position that Arlington is. And just to refresh people's memory, as if they needed it, we're about 95, 96% residential in terms of generation of revenue in this town. That does not look like it's going to be changing in any significant way anytime soon. Don't know how many other towns in the Commonwealth are in that kind of situation. Certainly none of the other towns in your district are, I understand that. But what, if anything, can you tell us about conversations or movement towards acknowledging the difficulties for a town like Arlington and keeping up with its expenses with that kind of constraint?
This is a big issue. And I think the last time I looked, we were looking at probably somewhere between 20 and 35 cities and towns that are in the same position where they're very dense, they're built up, and they don't have the ability to expand their commercial base.
And sorry, just for perspective, you're talking about 20 or 30 towns out of 350.
Yes, right,
so
right.
A very small
51 or something, yeah. So we're a small percentage, and so that places a much higher hurdle because nobody wants to give up their local aid, and most people will say, I don't need less, I need more. So it's a battle. I think there are some things that we can look at that will help Arlington. I actually think something like the Fair Share Amendment, which would increase taxes on people's personal income over $1 million. I think that's something that would help Arlington, because that money is specifically going to go into education and transportation. And those are two pieces that are incredibly important. We spend an enormous amount of money on educating our children, as we should. And so this could provide some relief to that. I also actually yesterday was meeting with the regional director of Elizabeth Warren's staff, and I actually raised this issue when she said, what are some of the issues facing your cities and towns? And I said transportation, the high cost of housing, a strong focus on education, and for a place like Arlington, our property taxes and our ability to raise revenue to support our town, especially Arlington, which is so well run, and where we count for every dollar and we use it wisely. We're reaching a point where you can't, the only place we can go is to the residents for their property taxes, and that's going to get more and more untenable for people, not because they don't want to, but because they can't. And so I believe that we need to keep fighting this fight. We need to keep making this known to the rest of the state. But also we need to support initiatives that I think are going to really help Arlington. And maybe it's not so obvious, but if you look at transportation, for instance, we are the hub, economic hub of the state in our area, okay? And that means people come here and they have to live here in order to get to their jobs. And I believe if we really focus more on transportation and why this is so important, is we can open up the state to more economic development. And that will allow us to increase our revenues and to get more money into the system so that we can increase local aid. But if you can't get from Springfield to Boston, you can't live in Springfield and work in Boston where the jobs are. And so we need to be very forward-thinking in opening up our transportation system to the south and to the west, and make those investments so people can move out of this general area. More people will come to our state because there's actually economic opportunity and jobs. It will make the western and central part of our state actually more attractive to industries, because they can move workers back and forth. And so and then it ultimately will be good for us. So I really think we need to get much smarter and bolder around what we do, much smarter and bolder on how we expand our transportation system.
Yeah, and I'm particularly struck by your use of the word bolder there, because I think that is what you're talking about. Massachusetts, of course, isn't a big state in terms of area. If you had a really effective and efficient rail system, especially a high-speed rail system, you can cover most of the state in a handleable kind of commute.
That's right.
And clearly you've laid out a number of compelling arguments for why this would be a great development and a great thing to commit to. But I think what's bolder, as you say, about that, or what needs more bold kinds of thinking or initiatives, is the fact that this is quite an investment that would take, a number of years, if not decades, to begin to return those benefits that you were describing. And that just seems like a tough row to hoe in the State House or anywhere else.
Right. Yep. Well, the longer you wait, the longer it will be. So, but I think we tend to be penny wise and pound foolish, and it is very hard for people to look beyond the moment. But I believe that as legislators and leaders, that's the argument we need to make, and we have to keep pushing that, because no big movement or no big change ever got done because people sat around and said, oh, well, let's know every single thing about it before we start. We just, I read this amazing story about how Boston developed their public water system. And it was basically two people who actually pushed against such enormous opposition by the residents to do that, to actually provide public water for all of Boston. And if they had shied away,
right, or been discouraged,
or not taken that strong position, it never would have gotten done. So.
Yeah, well, I doubt this. What you just described obviously is going to take a constituency of more than 2 people
Absolutely.
to push it through, no matter how
today,
determined
right.
you are. But let's hope that at least, that people can be entertaining or see the wisdom of starting to move down that path, and also understand, as you said, that you can't figure everything out before you get started. You have to get that commitment going, and then there's going to be a certain number of things you figure out as you go.
And
right?
It's not going to be easy.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not going to be easy, and it's going to take money.
So switching gears, somewhat abruptly, but I also want to make sure we give this enough time. One of the things that has come on our radar over the last month or two is what happened with the GIC, which seemed like it was almost an ambush in a sense. And the GIC is, you tell me, is government. I don't even remember what GIC stands for.
It's the Insurance Commission.
Thank you. And that basically, here in Arlington, the effect of that has been, of course, that moving to the GIC a few years ago for insurance coverage for all of our municipal employees has saved the town a bunch of money. So it has been a real boon for Arlington. So we're particularly interested, of course, in how things unfold with that. My understanding is that what happened, and the ambush I was referring to, is that some of the health providers that people use regularly were removed from the list of who were going to be funded or supported or subsidized by GIC. How did that come about? How did you hear about it? What is happening with that?
So the way I heard about it is I was walking out of a formal session and somebody stopped me and said, "Did you hear what the GIC, the Group Insurance Commission, just voted?" And I said, "No." And they said they're dropping 3 carriers. And I said, "Well, can you send me something just so I know what's happened?" So I went up to my office, and an hour later or so I got this email, and I immediately called the Senate Ways and Means Chair and the Senate President and said,
Right.
What?
Yeah. So good. Very similar to our reaction
right,
when we
exactly,
found that kind of thing.
Because I know that this is a huge issue for 500,000 members and residents in our Commonwealth. So this is no small potatoes. Yeah, there's 500,000 active and retirees, about 500,000. So this is no small potatoes, right? And so I think that, what happened was a complete break in process and in communication. And there is no other way than to describe it as a huge debacle. What's really, I was one of the co-chairs of an oversight hearing, and that asked the GIC and Administration and Finance, the Governor's Administration and Finance Secretary, to come in and talk to us about what happened and what was going on. And what is so disturbing to me about this, and there are many things, and I want to say I channeled my best Ken Donnelly in reacting to this. He would have been absolutely apoplectic and all over this, as he should be, as we all should be, is that there was, you lose trust in the system when you do things like this. For all I know, this may be the best idea since sliced bread, right? Maybe it is good that we go down to 3 carriers. Maybe we are going to save money, and the quality of the healthcare will go up. Maybe access will increase. We have no idea. And so, but what happens is, what I do know is I don't trust them anymore. That's what you say to yourself. What are they doing to me? Why did they do this to me? And it really eats away at the system. And it's really important for us as elected officials and state officers to understand that what our most valuable commodity we have here is trust. And I understand the incredible concern and upset that this caused people, and they are absolutely right to be worried. I got more phone calls about this in my office than I've gotten on anything in many, many months. I think they did a lot in secret. I think they rushed a decision or didn't communicate a decision, and it really caught people off guard. And there were so many questions that were unanswered in how they delivered it that the only response that a normal person could have would be panic. So now they've rescinded their decision, and they have they've reinstated the carriers that they dropped for this year. We have a whole series of questions. In fact, I just finished working on a letter with my other co-chairs of the Oversight Committee with further questions for them. I filed a bill that would require them to give notice to the legislature of any of these major changes. They do procurement every 5 years, I believe it is. So you get a 3 to 5 year contract, and then they do a whole new procurement. So for those things that they notify the legislature. But I think there's some other things that we have to do. We've got to I think we have to change the makeup of the GIC Commission. I think we have to get people on the GIC that actually understand healthcare and the healthcare market. Because this didn't only affect the members. This affected Tufts and Fallon and Harvard Pilgrim. Fallon is one of the biggest employers in Worcester. Well, what does that mean? You're saving $20 million, but what happens to these people now who might lose their job? Have you done the analysis? Have you done the cost-benefit analysis of that? And we didn't get any of those answers. This bill, and I filed, but I think we need to. So I think we need to change the GIC Commission, and I know Labor wants another member on there, and I'm not opposed to that at all. But I think that the governor gets to appoint people from the private sector, but there's no definition of the expertise that those people need to have. So that's one thing I think we need to do. I think we need to understand the procurement. They said that there were many rules and regulations that did not allow them to talk about the procurement process. Well, I want to understand what those are, and I think if they are there, we need to change them so that it's more transparent. And then I think we need to have a better notice of what these changes are, what they're going to be, how much they've, how detailed they understand. I mean, they're telling us we're going to save money by going to something like United Healthcare. To Anthem's Unicare, but we haven't. They haven't done the negotiations. We don't know what the plan design is. So how do we know we're going to keep our doctors and have access and it's going to be cheaper? We don't know that. I just want to say, in full disclosure, I am not part of the GIC. Mm-hmm. I get my insurance through my husband's company. So I'm just looking at what's happening to everybody else. Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I mean, just one more thing on this, and then we'll move on, and that is you described it as a debacle, and aptly so. It does seem like more than anything else, it is one of, if not obfuscation, certainly a process that is insufficiently transparent, and then a lack of communication in terms of how it is that they reach these conclusions and how, keeping you informed as they were moving, or keeping everyone informed as they were moving along, et cetera. So those are, given the significant response from the legislature and from the population about this, and as you said, when you're talking about 500,000 people being affected, that is a gigantic number within the Commonwealth. can we assume that these issues are likely to be effectively addressed such that this kind of thing will not be repeated in the future? Or
well, I wish I could say yes,
of course you can't
absolutely, but
guarantee that.
one of the problems is that we have attention spans of 15 minutes, right? So they've made a decision, they're rescinding it, but it's our job to keep pressure on them. And frankly, the governor needs to take responsibility for this. This GIC is under Administration of Finance, which is under the governor. He knows that. He knows that this was happening. There was $20 million, I think, that was reallocated in his budget. So they depended on this $20 million that they were going to save. So he needs to take some responsibility for this. I can't promise you that we won't see this again. What I can promise you is that I'm not going to be quiet about it, and I am going to move as fast and as hard as I can to at least address some of the problems that caused this to happen. So, and I think there are actually other people in the Senate that feel the same way.
Okay. We are going to take a short break now, and when we come back, we're going to talk a little bit more about various other initiatives that Cindy is involved with and pushing through. And we welcome you to join us on the other side of this short break.
Going live in 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
I'm Brenda Mahoney.
And I'm James Milan, inviting you to join us for Arlington Public News.
On each show, we bring you an inside look at the news, events, and issues that affect all of us right here in Arlington.
To watch our latest newscast, check your cable schedule or check out our latest newscasts and segments on the web at news.acmi.tv.
We hope to see you soon.
It's good to recycle because we can stay healthy.
Recycling is better for your life because you'll be saving money. Some people get rid of their trash by burning it. That's really not a good way to get rid of plastic.
When we recycle, we reduce how much toxic gas gets put into the air.
Keeps our ecosystem running, and we will save the earth.
Hi, and welcome back to this conversation with State Senator Cindy Friedman. Cindy, I just wanted to follow up on one thing that we were talking about in the first segment, and that is the Fair Share Amendment that you had mentioned, which does, of course, need to be, have a whole process that it would need to go through in order to become part of the Constitution. But what I'm struck by is that is one of the few examples, again, if it were to proceed forward, one of the few examples of where we could be adding a revenue stream to what is available. And so therefore think that maybe education, transportation, as you mentioned, would get addressed in Arlington and other such communities. I'm wondering whether there are any other places as well that we might anticipate more revenue to allocate to towns such as Arlington. So again, having acknowledged that the difficulty of pulling revenue from any other town for Arlington's benefit. But what about marijuana soon to be legalized? The numbers seem encouraging coming out of Colorado in terms of how much revenue has been generated. Colorado, Washington, other places. Obviously, gaming is on the things are being built in the state that should generate revenue as well. Can we expect that any of that will pay off? Where are things at in terms of the thinking in the Senate around that kind of thing?
I mean, those are you named two industries that people are depending on getting revenue. And I think if they were to move forward successfully, there would be revenue. There's also downsides to both of them, and we have to address those. But and there's questions now because, especially around the legalization of marijuana, because of the federal government and whether or not they're going to crack down on the use of marijuana, because it's still, by federal standards, it's still illegal. So there's some question there. Gaming is gaming, and it comes with all its pros and cons. The recent stories with Wynn is putting some uncertainty into this. There's right now about 1,000 people that are going to be working on the construction of the Wynn casinos, and how's that all going to play out?
I mean, so that project is well underway.
That's right, and but there's some uncertainty, right? How do we deal with this? We expect a certain bar that people have to, they have to meet that bar in order to do that kind of business, and clearly, Wynn Industries did not meet that bar. So I think it's a little iffy, but I think if it works and we can keep the right regulations in place, we will get some revenue out of that. But I go back to what I said before. The best way that we can handle this problem is to ensure that people have access to the economic development that will ebb and flow, okay? Industries change. What's hot now is no longer hot in 15 years. If we have a state where people have access across our state to whatever the economic industries are that are proliferating at the time, we will ensure that people have access to jobs. And we won't be depending, I think, so much on these industries, especially in and around Boston, and depend so much on them and have our outcomes be so dependent on them. So I still think we go back to the transportation. And there are a lot of good jobs in Massachusetts that my understanding are going unfilled, and it's because they can't get people into them.
Yeah, so it makes a lot of sense. I mean, whether it's given all of the complications that you've just described around marijuana, around gaming, et cetera, and we know that those things will come and go. And as you said, ebb and flow in terms of which industries are ascendant, et cetera. But if you have the infrastructure, transportation infrastructure set up such that to be able to fully to enjoy the full benefits of whatever the resurgent or ascendant industry is.
Right. And I do believe that the Fair Share Amendment is really about fair share. I mean, besides all that, it's a great revenue generator, but it's also fair. If you make, 15% of an income at $30,000 has much more of an effect than 15% of an income at $100,000 or at $1 million. Yes, it's more money, but you still have more money in your pot.
Right.
And I just believe that we need to start looking at what our values are and how much is enough. And I think it's fair to ask people who make over $1 million to tax that income over $1 million at a slightly higher rate, 4%. I really think that that's fair.
Okay, on that subject of fairness, let's talk a little bit about one of the things that you are very much involved with in the Senate, I know, and that is mental health and opiates and opiate addiction, et cetera. I'm not necessarily tying those things in together, but they are the kinds of issues that a little bit more fairness, perhaps, in terms of how policy is formed and how steps are taken to address those issues might be in order. So tell us a little bit about what it is what kind of legislation you are interested in sponsoring and what the work is that you're doing right now in those areas.
It's very interesting what you said, because while a lot of people think that they're two parallel paths, it actually is much more commingled than people think. I mean, from a lot of the studies, you'll see somewhere between 45 and 60% of people who have a substance use disorder have a mental illness. So the the comorbidity of those two is really interlinked. And you can't, for those people, address one and not address the other. In fact, research shows that if you address the mental illness, you often address the substance use disorder because people are self-medicating. I mean, it's logical. I am the co-chair of the Joint Committee on Mental Health and Substance Use Disorder Recovery. And we currently have a bill before us that the governor filed, which we are working on to expand and to address, I think to expand what's in that bill so that we have a more robust response to what's going on in the Commonwealth right now. There's a couple things. There's, first of all, prevention is very big. It does turn out that if you can educate people, especially children, at an early age, and you can start, you can do a lot in form of prevention and actually having people not start to begin with. You have to be really careful. You have to have evidence-based, high-quality programs that have been proven to be effective. Coming in and scaring kids to death does not work. It didn't work with alcohol. It worked with tobacco because it's the truth, right? I mean, it's like, yes, but you need really evidence-based what works. And we want to make sure we put our money into those kinds of programs. Addressing how doctors prescribe is important, but it's not the only piece of it. The pharmaceutical companies have a huge stake in this game. They caused it, they perpetrated.
And have played a huge role, right.
And they played a huge role. They need to be at the table a lot more than they are. And they need to take some responsibility for what's happened, and they need to help us solve the problem. And if that means putting resources into it, then they should be giving us resources. Also, we need to be looking at how they price and how they distribute, because they are culpable, I believe.
Yeah, and I know that there are in I don't know if it's in other parts of the country. Anyway, I've recently heard that there are lawsuits being initiated,
there are some, yes.
And similar to what took place against the tobacco companies some years back. And so clearly that comes from that same set of conclusions that you were just describing. These guys, are at the heart of this in a lot of ways.
Yeah, and that bill, the governor's bill does not address any part of the pharmaceuticals. And he said it's because there are suits going on. Well, that he's right, there are suits, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't be taking our own steps. And maybe we might go too far and we'll have to backtrack, but we need to put a stake in the ground in that area. And then we need to really look at how we deliver the resources, how we deliver services. And there are some wonderful programs that are going on across the state, and we need to make sure that we support them. One of the things I want to say is we are so lucky in our towns that we have the police departments that we have. Chief Ryan in Arlington has been a leader in moving this conversation from these people are criminal because they're sick to these people need help. We are the first responders so often. How do we become more effective in moving them into treatment rather than criminalizing them? And because mental health especially has been so criminalized over the course of the last 40 or 50 years, this is a huge step. You see statistics, but just in Middlesex, the House of Corrections, they will tell you that about 70% of the people that come in there have a mental health issue. And that's just one example of how we criminalize mental illness. And these people are there because of something that happened that was due to their mental illness. And families are just desperate for getting their family members help. And having the police be part of this solution is huge. And I can't tell you how important it is to have people like Chief Ryan out there. Changing the way people look at this and working with police departments to provide services. Now let's listen to that, okay? We're asking our police to provide mental health and substance use services, okay? These people are sick. We don't ask the police to help people who have diabetes, right? Or who have a heart, they have a heart attack. But somehow this is something that the police are now having to deal with. We need to support them, and that means that more access to treatment in the community, to ensure that people who do this job get a fair wage so that they will stay doing it. Right now we're losing providers all over the place because of the rates we reimburse them at. This is social workers and psychologists and people who work with those who have a mental illness are so low that they're saying, I got to get out of this business. I can't afford to be in it. We need to ensure that our emergency rooms have the resources they need to help people when they come in. We have to stop this notion that the insurance companies get to decide what care I'm going to get rather than my provider. So there's a lot to do. I think people are finally starting to come together and realizing that there's these issues and that we need to address them as a whole. But I could go on for another 2 hours on this very issue, but I'm really happy to be able to be involved in that, and we're working very hard on this bill that the governor's filed. It's a good base. It gives us a start, but I'm going to try very hard to get in the code, the dual diagnosis stuff, piece, and others. I think other solutions that I think will move us forward.
Well, I sincerely hope so, and glad to hear about that because, as you already mentioned, here in town we're lucky enough to have a police department headed by Chief Ryan, who are clearly committed to this. And then you also did mention the Middlesex House of Correction or jail, and shout out to Sheriff Katujian,
Absolutely.
who is also a real vital partner to chiefs of police like Chief Ryan and others in moving things forward. So we've got that going on at the town level, we've got it going on at the county level, and you're working in the same committed way on the state level. That's got to be good news.
I want to say one other thing. So we did file a bill that was included in the budget last year that would provide a pilot program in Middlesex County, and this was very much in cooperation with the sheriff to build a restoration center, which is a notion of a place where people could be brought voluntarily to, if they had an interaction with the police or emergency room, where there would be a triage there which would get them either into an inpatient or provide services, or and it would stop that initial entry into the criminal justice system or even into the emergency room. So we're working very closely with the sheriff, who's been a champion of this as well, to start that pilot. And we've gotten $250,000 for the first year, so we're looking forward to doing that work. And he's a great partner in this.
So continuing on this same theme of fairness, which may take us right through to the end of the interview, another initiative I know you're very deeply involved with. What is a fair minimum wage, and how is that legislation faring, so to speak, right now in the State House?
I believe very strongly that we need a $15 an hour minimum wage. And it's really interesting because I've been around to lots of industries and companies in my district, human service companies, people delivering services, even restaurants and food service. And I say to them, what do you want us to do? What's your priority for us? And I will tell you that 9 times out of 10, the first thing they say is, will you please raise the minimum wage?
9 times out of 10.
Which has been very, they're part of corporations, they're part of, and so, or they're part of a larger group, and they want to raise the wages, but they can't. And I think the minimum wage, and I just want to be clear, MIT has a wage calculator, and if you go in and you can pick the county, Suffolk, Middlesex, Plymouth, et cetera, and you can put in, you're a single person with a child, et cetera, and it will calculate what it costs to live in that county. For Suffolk and Middlesex, $15 an hour for a family, it's not even going to cut it. So let's just acknowledge that we're starting low, even with $15 an hour. But I think that $15 an hour, I think there's a good chance that it will come out of the legislature in some form or another. It's currently a ballot question. It's not surprising how much support it has. And I think that it's certainly something that I'm working with the Labor and Workforce Development Committee to move along. And I know that we're starting to have conversations about it. So I'm hopeful that we as the legislature can do something.
So what is the pushback on that idea? Is it really that, what we hear in the kind of floating in the air generally as the opposition is based on, hey, you'll put small business owners in a really tough position that way. Is that the main thrust of the opposition?
I think it's a real concern from smaller businesses about, it's a big increase. Now it happens over a number of years. It just doesn't happen, but it is a big increase. And my feeling is that I understand that, and I take it seriously, but we really need to look at some other policies that we have around wages and benefits. It is unclear to me why employers should be in the business of healthcare. Now just imagine if you as an employer didn't have to pay healthcare for your employees, which I'm not suggesting that they don't, because there's no other choice. But how much money that might free up for you to actually pay your employees. And so I think a lot of this goes back to some issues like healthcare, which is right now almost the biggest issue that we're all facing because it affects all of us. We really need to look at a single payer system. Businesses should not be responsible for healthcare. And I don't know why they're not screaming about it, because they don't, it's a flawed system that they are responsible for that. Mm-hmm. So I think if we could look at some other policies that we might be able to implement, then possibly that worry from small businesses would be reduced, because they'd have more money. Now we'd be paying more in taxes because we'd have to all be paying for our health care. I mean, it's not the perfect solution, but we need to move in that direction. Mm-hmm. Because businesses at some point, they're going to say, I can't afford to be in business.
Right, or they're going to pass the costs on to their customers anyway, and we're going to be paying more money one way or the other, it sounds like.
I think that's true for very small businesses. I don't think that's true for large businesses, and I think I have less empathy. I need more information as to why that would be a problem for a large company. And I understand it goes back to the shareholders. Is my stock, am I making enough money? But at some point we all got to say enough, okay? We all need to kind of say, you know what, we have enough. And we need to look out for other people. And we have to stop making money on the backs of other people. So I know it sounds very,
Yeah, well, most of what
scary,
you say, most of what you were just saying reminds me of the fact that you are operating on the state level, and that is both going to be reflected, the work that you do is going to directly impact and be reflected in towns and communities within the Commonwealth. But it also is well, I wonder how much you as a state senator and the legislature in Massachusetts in general is also in a reactive mode to what's happening on the federal level, for instance. Obviously, I understand how you pay attention to your constituents, so things come up from the bottom, but also there are things that all of us are contending with or reacting to in terms of federal policy. You mentioned in an earlier part of our conversation regarding marijuana that it's not dicier, but it's murkier what's going to happen in Massachusetts and other places because of the stance. So I guess if I have a question, the question is how much of the shadow of what's going on the federal level is impacting the work that you do in the State House, and how much do you feel like that's just a looming presence for legislators in the State House right now?
So I will only speak for myself. I know I've had conversations with other members of the Senate. It's huge. It's huge. I mean, healthcare, major impact for the state of Massachusetts. What do we do when the federal government cuts their Medicare spending, or Medicaid spending, excuse me, or goes to block grants? Transportation money, very big for Massachusetts. The tax bill in many ways was a direct attack on states like Massachusetts and California and New York, who have wealthier citizens. On the whole, they have more revenue from personal income, and they directly went after that income when you start saying how much you can deduct for your mortgages, et cetera. Okay, we don't know the ramifications of that tax, of the new tax bill. We are not hopeful. So it is very big, just in healthcare and transportation. In education, and what they're rolling back, for instance, the federal government was starting to go after these for-profit education companies who were basically stealing money from their students and not providing, and now they're rolling back on that. That has a huge impact on residents in Massachusetts. What do we do? How do we protect people? So a lot of what I think you're seeing is states wrangling with how they protect what it is they have and the progress they've made in this environment. And we spend a lot of time doing that. And it's worrisome. And it pushes me to make sure that what we have in place to protect our residents, to protect our most vulnerable, to maintain the quality of life that we have in Massachusetts. It's not perfect, but it's pretty good in a lot of ways. It makes me feel a stronger need to be out there doing that work, because I don't want to go backwards. This shouldn't be a free-for-all where the wealthiest and the most powerful get all of the access and the everyday people don't. And I want to go back to something that I said before about the minimum wage and fair share. This is an issue of balance. I mean, I call it having enough, but really it's about balance. When you have the enormous imbalance in wages that we have, when you have the enormous imbalance of the cost of housing and the cost of healthcare, when there are some people that when some people can have all they want and more, and most people can't, you have a very unstable environment, and you have a very unstable economy, and you have a very unstable country. So it's our job not to tell people what they can make and get into the business of controlling everything, but it is our job to ensure that there's some balance, that people maintain access to the standard of living that they need in order to raise their families, in order to be successful, in order to be healthy, in order for their children to succeed. That's our job. That is my job. I see that. And so what I look at is what do I have to do as a elected legislator to maintain or ensure that there's balance. And that specter of the federal government just makes that even more intense.
That's a really good point that you make, because I think wherever you fall on the political spectrum, you understand the importance of stability or the danger of instability. And you know, as you said, this is not a tenable situation, it doesn't seem, if it continues to go in this way, where you have that tremendous imbalance. So yes, let us hope that, you know, people, at least whatever their partisan perspective on policy, et cetera, can acknowledge that, you know, that is the reality that we're looking at now, and that it needs to be addressed.
Right. Well said. Do you want my job?
No, so much not. Last topic then is, you know, we were talking before we went on air about the fact that you are still a new senator, relatively speaking. You know, it's under a year that you've been doing this. But by the same token, you had so much experience already as Ken Donnelly's chief of staff and just in and around the state senate, that things are coming your way that might not for a true rookie, let's say. So what are some of the positions that you've taken on, and the things that are on your, you know, that are filling your plate that you might not have anticipated, or, you know, just that you'd like to let people know about?
Well, I didn't anticipate the GIC piece. I am on the ethics committee, Senate Ethics Committee. I was asked to be on that about in the beginning of December. I did not expect that, nor did I expect we would be so busy. I've been asked to be on the committee to look at sexual harassment in the Senate, and that's just started up, so I've asked to be a member of that. And then I think just I didn't quite anticipate the panels and the discussions around issues that I've been working on, like mental health and substance use disorder. So that's been a little bit of a surprise, but interesting. And the more I talk to people, the more I learn. So I really like that. But yeah, I think those are some of the things I wasn't quite ready for.
Are you even busier than you had anticipated that you would be in stepping into these shoes? Because again, they were shoes you're very familiar with.
Yeah, I am. I do feel much busier than I anticipated. It is a very busy time of year. One of the big changes that has happened is that we've moved up the date in which all the committees have to report out all of their bills. Meaning they have to look at them all and determine whether they are going to move forward or whether they're not going to move forward. And so, and our committee had a lot of bills, over 100. So we've just kind of gone through that exercise. So that takes a lot of time, and then there's a lot of other things that are going on. So yes, I am more busier than I anticipated.
Did they move up that date for, you know, good reasons, I guess?
Yeah, I mean, I think they moved it up so that bills would move.
Okay.
Because the longer you can keep them in committee, the longer they sit.
They just sit.
And so this
So
is
that's
like,
a good move as far as we, the constituents, are concerned.
I think it's a very good move.
Sure.
I think it would have been better if I would have been willing to move it up even more. But and then the other big piece is that the bills that were filed by the Senate, by senators, would go back to the Senate, and bills that are filed by the House would go back to the House, which is a big change because there's always more House members on a committee than there are Senate members, and they can stop a Senate bill from moving forward. So this is helpful.
Good. So a couple of steps you've just outlined that might, over time, well,
Right.
the short-term effect is you're even busier.
Yep.
The longer-term effect is a more efficient process, we hope, and more action
I
as
believe so.
opposed to words, which everybody would
Right,
welcome.
right, yes,
And I have the
including me.
feeling you will, that will suit you
Yeah.
very well. All right, I think that we are satisfied enough for the moment.
Great.
And again, we've taken a lot of your time this morning. We do appreciate it. We will be back.
Great. I look forward to it. This is fun.
All right. This is Talk of the Town, just to remind you. I am James Milan. I've just had an excellent conversation, as far as I'm concerned, with our State Senator Cindy Friedman. Hope you have enjoyed it, and we'll see you next time.